Hi, I'm Kiley Peters, the owner and CEO of Brainchild Studios. Brainchild Studios is a digital content marketing and website creation agency, and we primarily work with brands targeting millennial moms. So in this series, I'm going to spend some time walking you through how to create a content marketing strategy. So why might this be of interest to you? Well, if you're a small business owner, chances are you probably want to understand your customer. You probably want to make a few bucks, and you probably don't want to spend all of your time and energy all day, every day, creating content to make a dollar. So instead, let's go ahead and create a content strategy together, or at least I'll walk you through how to do so. And that way you'll have a strategy on how to build your business without exhausting every single resource that you have in order to do so. Okay, so when creating a content marketing strategy, there's a couple of different things that you want to keep in mind. First and foremost, before we dive in, make sure you understand exactly what your business goals are. We're not going to dive into that in this series, but if you haven't already figured out what you're trying to accomplish with your business, pause, stop, take a break, and go figure out what your goals are. Because if you don't understand what your business goals are, it's going to be really, really difficult to be able to identify when you've succeeded. So take a moment, understand what your business goals are. Take more than a moment, take a week, take a month, whatever it ends up being, but make sure that you understand what your business goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, those benchmarks you need to accomplish and to achieve in order to move your business forward. Okay, now that you know what your business goals are, let's make sure you understand what your business values are, your company values, the things that drive the day-to-day operations of your business. Make sure you have those understood and identified. Then figure out what is the vision that you want for your company? What is it that you're trying to do in the world? Again, we're not going to dive into this. We don't have time in this series, but understand what your values and your vision are for your company, and then make sure that you go the extra step and go ahead and lock in what your mission is for your company, which the way that we look at that, at least, is your mission is how you're going to accomplish your vision. So before we even dive into the nitty-gritty details of how we create the content strategy, step one, what are your business goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Great. And don't just say more sales or we want more people to know about us. Be super actionable. Make those goals very smart and specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound, and make sure that you can identify exactly what those metrics look like. So you want to achieve 20% increase in sales year over year or month over month. You want to drive 1,000 more visitors to your website month over month, year over year. Whatever it ends up being, be super specific about those. So we now have our business goals locked down. Then we take some time and we identify our business values, vision, and mission. Now we have all that groundwork laid. And that's super important because everything that we create for our business, including our content strategy, needs to align to those things. Let's dive into what we're going to talk through in this series in terms of how to create a content marketing strategy. Now, we work specifically in the digital space, so a lot of this is going to be very digital focused. However, that does not mean that you can't expand beyond the digital confines of the internet and technology. But there's so much to do there. So your choice. But step one in creating a content strategy is research. Just like the foundation of really all amazing things in life is research. So you want to understand who are your competitors, both online and offline, and what does your marketplace look like, both online and offline? Because sometimes those things are different, and we'll dive into that in more detail. So we want to understand what our competitors and that research looks like, as well as our marketplace. Then we want to make sure we take some time to clearly identify our target audience. And that is super important because, like all things that matter most in life, we believe that it all starts in and really ends with people. So you need to take some time to really identify who your target audience is, understand their psychographics, their demographics, the things that they are struggling with, the problems they're trying to solve, the challenges that they face, and really what their end goals are. So we'll dive into how to really identify and map out exactly who your target audience is, but that's super important before you step into anything to do with content, because if you can create content up the wazoo, but if you don't understand who your target audience is and how you can really add value to their lives, then you're just guessing at that point, and that's not really an efficient way to use your time. Once we've identified exactly who our target audiences are, we're going to create content, original content for each target audience, and then we're going to slice and dice it into a series of supporting pieces of content so that we can spread them across multiple online and potentially offline platforms, so we can reach your audience where they are in ways that add the most value to them. Once we have all that identified, then we'll package it all up with a nice bow on top, and we will create an editorial calendar with all of those original and supporting pieces of content, so you have an action plan and a roadmap as to how to get started. That's what we're going to walk through in this series. Buckle up and sit back and enjoy the ride. Customer research, competitor research, and marketplace research, the foundation of your content strategy. And once we talk through those elements, we're going to talk about identifying and really building out your target audience personas. So you probably already know who your competitors are, or at least you think you do, but it's definitely worth taking a few minutes and identifying, are they local? Are they regional? Are they national? Are they international? And then also taking a look at your business. Does your business primarily operate online or offline, or does it do both? Or if you're offline, do you want to become more online? Because many people do now. But whatever works best for you, take a few minutes to identify that. But then also identify the key products and services that your company offers, and just take a moment and Google it, or search it, or Bing it, or Yahoo it, whatever you want to call it. Take a look and see, when you type in the core products and services that you offer, who else pops up? Because sometimes what happens is your online competitors are not always identical to your offline competitors. And that's important to identify. Once you've identified your competitors, take a few minutes to do an audit of their content. So take a look at their social media content, all of the various platforms they may be on. Take a look at their website and understand, are they investing in their website? Is it an outdated website? Does it look brand new? What's going on there? And then really hone in on the content they're creating. So take a look at the original content they're creating, something such as maybe webinars, podcasts, ebooks, research, white papers, blog posts, anything like that. Understand what content they're creating and the angle that they're approaching it from. So make a list of that, write it all down, and then hold on to that. Next, take a look at your marketplace. So what's happening in your marketplace? What's going on in the world? How is that affecting the area that your business is operating in? Are things, transitioning more online? Are they being formatted in different media forms? What's happening in your marketplace, and what do you as a business need to do to address those changes? And are your competitors addressing any of those changes? If they are, okay, definitely something to note, but also try to think 2 steps ahead and think outside of the box. We're not trying to replicate the things that our competitors are doing. Just kind of keep those in mind. When you're doing competitor research, it's great to understand what your competitors are doing, but try not to get too wrapped up in it. Because like I said, you're not trying to replicate what your competitors are doing. You just want to be aware of what they're doing and then put it aside, because you need to do something different. You need to think outside the box. You need to think 2 steps ahead, and you need to address your customers' problems in ways that aren't being addressed yet, which we'll get into. So once you've identified your competitors, done your research, and done your content audit on them, great. Now you've identified your marketplace. You've done a bit of an audit there, also great. Now let's take a moment to talk about customer research. There's 2 primary ways to go about customer research, qualitative and quantitative, and they both accomplish different things. Qualitative research is more one-on-one talking to people. It might be an interview, it might be focus groups, different things like that. Quantitative, where you quantify their results and their responses, is something more like a survey. Now, let's take a minute to talk a little bit about best practices and uses for each of these types of customer research. Customer research is not necessarily inexpensive. However, there are ways to go about it to make it more affordable. One of the things you may be interested in doing is qualitative research, but it's time intensive and there's a lot of ways that you can really screw it up. So let's talk about some of those ways to not screw it up. It's also important to note that if you're thinking about doing focus groups, I would suggest to maybe think again. There's a lot of research that shows that when people are in a group, there tends to be groupthink, and there's oftentimes the opportunities where people don't actually voice what they're really thinking. So what we recommend is one-on-one interviews. And there's been a lot of research, actually from Nielsen, that shows if you're very specific and exactly who you're talking to, if you identify 5 to 7 people in those very specific parameters, so the demographic, the psychographic, very specific parameters, you can derive about 80% of your qualitative research insights by interviewing those 5 to 7 people, as if instead, as opposed to if you were to interview 15 or more, which is really helpful to know, because who has the time to interview one-on-one 15 different people and then analyze all those interviews and aggregate all those insights? Nobody has time for that. So I recommend take a look at exactly who you're talking about. This is also why it's super important to understand your target audience. So say you've gotten very clear on your target audience, which we will do in just a moment. Identify 5 to 7 people from an unbiased group of people. So no, not all of your best friends, because yes, they are biased. But there's a number of different third-party tools out there that you can utilize. But nonetheless, you've identified your group of people. Qualitative research is super helpful when you really want to understand the why, the story behind it. And you really need to go into research with an open mind. So yes, it's important to identify your hypothesis. And a hypothesis is essentially a statement that says, we believe that if these things are true, then this will be the output. And so you start your research with that in mind. And you're either trying to prove it or you're trying to disprove it. But nonetheless, you have to keep an open mind so you don't bias your own research. But the goal is to figure out as a business, what are the answers you're looking for? So what are the lingering questions and that you need somebody to answer for you? And then you kind of back into it and figure out what are the questions you need to ask in order to find the answers that you're seeking. But you have to make sure you do it in an unbiased, non-leading way. I would recommend to take a moment and write out a scripted introduction. This is important because, one, it helps to remind you that you need to treat everybody the same. It's also helpful as a reminder to not really respond to people's questions in any type of validating fashion. So you want to ask people questions and then let them respond. You don't want to say things like, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Oh, no, because now you validated everything that they've said. You could say something like, well, that's interesting. Could you tell me more? Something like that doesn't necessarily validate, but it does dig in further, which is exactly what we're looking for. We want to write a scripted introduction. Make sure to let them know what to expect. And then generally speaking, we recommend compensating people for their time, because you want to make sure that you're getting the results and the data collection that you're hoping for. So you don't want to just, do a bunch of things for free. Compensate somebody, like maybe it's a $50 gift card for their time type of thing. I would also recommend recording your interview. So something like Zoom would be great, or whatever other video conferencing recording platform you might want to use. It's really important to record your interview, because you're going to need to go back and watch it later to analyze their results. You don't want to try to take notes while you're interviewing, because chances are you're going to miss opportunities to dive in deeper. when you lay out your questions, you ask the same core questions to everybody, and are very intentional with the way that you lay them out. But maybe you identify a couple follow-up questions, and really you have to really listen as people tell you their stories so you don't miss the opportunities to dive in deeper while not validating exactly what they're saying, but still being very interested in exactly what they're saying. So once you have conducted your interview, when we do them, they're usually between like 30 to 45 minutes. You wrap everything up. Meanwhile, you might be able to take a few notes if anything pops up, mostly just to help facilitate your interview. And then after you've conducted all of your interviews, go back, watch the recordings, and take notes in a spreadsheet of some sort. We've created a template that just allows us to take notes based on every question and every interviewee. And then what we do is we go through and we highlight, or we color code things where we start to see trends, because that's the goal, is we start to see trends. Usually when we've done this, after about 4 interviewees, the 5th, the 6th, and maybe the 7th, all just start to repeat the same things, which is important to know exactly like which pieces are key to hone in on. But it's also nice because we know, okay, we've gotten to that point, we're starting that repetition, these are the key pieces. So I would take that away for qualitative research. And again, it's important to understand the story. So you really want to ask questions, open-ended questions that will allow people to tell you their stories. I will also say one other benefit of qualitative research is you get to use the language, or listen to and hopefully use the language that your audience uses themselves. And this can be helpful sometimes in different marketing techniques or campaigns, etc. So listen to the language that your audience is using, and then insert those strategic pieces back into your content as you push it out into the world. Because as we know, people respond better to content where they can see themselves in it. Same thing when they can hear themselves in it, or they recognize the same types of words that they use. So lots of benefits to qualitative research. We have a second kind of research, quantitative research. Now, quantitative research is equally as important, but the benefits here are a bit different. You might invest in quantitative research when you're trying to address a large target market. So this might be helpful for hundreds of respondents types of things. And this is also, or can also be helpful to validate at a large scale the theories and the insights you've derived from your qualitative research. A couple of different ways you can approach it. Obviously, you can do qualitative on its own. You can do qualitative on it. You can do quantitative on its own. You can do qualitative on its own, but you can also do them together as they have varying benefits. When you're conducting quantitative research, make sure that you're using this as an opportunity to ask, and this might be something like a survey. So ask questions that have very closed-ended responses, generally speaking. So this is a good opportunity to ask questions that the answer might be yes or no. Or you might want to ask pricing questions. Would you be interested in paying up to, this bracket, this bracket, this bracket? Another thing to keep in mind when you're conducting your survey questions, or you're crafting your survey questions, don't give people overlapping responses. And what I mean by that is, if you were to ask, how much would you be willing to pay for XYZ product? Don't say $1 to $10, $10 to $20, $20 to $30. Now what happens is, when you get your data back, if somebody was like, well, I'll pay $10 for that, but you've given them a response that has $10 in there twice, now all of your data is skewed. So make sure you're doing something that's like 0 to $9.99, 10 to $19.99, 20 to $29.99, etc. Something like that. Just make sure that none of your brackets overlap, because otherwise that data is going to be really unusable. So yes, surveys are great to ask those types of closed-ended questions. Also super helpful when you're trying to look at data at scale, but make sure that you don't forget to ask all of the super important demographic information at the end. So demographic information being things like gender, ethnicity, household income, potentially locations, depending on your business, maybe parental status, maybe marital status, maybe education level, things like that, because what that allows you to do when you get your data back at the end is now you can create these narratives of cross-analyzing demographic information with your other questions you've asked. So you hopefully will be able to say things like, women 30 to 39 that live in urban environments are more willing to pay $0 to $9.99 than women of the same age living in suburban environments. And now you're able to kind of create that narrative and learn more about your product or your service or how you should be going to market, all those types of things. So that's super important. And also all of this research, your qualitative and your quantitative, is all really important to help identify your target audience. Now we're going to take all of this beautiful customer research and really hone in on and identify our target audience. So target audience is so key. I personally believe that people are the thing that matters most in life, but I also believe that that's true for marketing as well. Because the reality is, if you don't know who you're marketing to, it's a lot of wasted effort. If anyone's familiar with the show Schitt's Creek, I was watching some of the documentary about the creating of Schitt's Creek, and they were so focused on honing in on who these characters were, which is one of the reasons the show won so many awards, because they really took the time to develop the characters. And by doing so, they knew them inside and out. So I recommend you know your target audience inside and out. And the reality is that you can take this time to identify them, but you're going to continue to hone that audience persona and that profile over time. So make sure that you understand things like demographics as well as psychographics. Again, as we just discussed, demographics, things such as gender, ethnicity, household income, education level, marital status, parental status, anything like that. I like to refer to demographics as kind of like the baseball stats of audience building, because the reality is you can't really argue with them. They are this age, they make this much money, they live in this place. Like, those are just facts, right? They're not really up for interpretation. Now, the psychographics, though, are where it gets really interesting. Because the reality is, you can have a 34-year-old Caucasian woman that lives in the suburbs. What are her political views? How does she feel about different social issues? How does she feel about the environment? How does she live her life? Does she binge watch Bravo and eat Tostitos all day long? Or is she out there running 5Ks every day and she voluntarily dubs herself as crunchy? Like, what are those psychological and those lifestyle trends that really, really hone in on who that person is? And I will say, once you take the time to really understand this audience, everything becomes so much more clear. But really, really get in there. You want to understand not just the demographics, not just the psychographics, but what are the challenges that they're running into? What are the core problems that they're trying to solve? Because the reality is, you need to solve those. That's your job. But you can't solve it if you don't know what it is. So really understand, what are the problems that your audience needs to be solved? What are the goals that they're trying to accomplish? And what is standing in their way? And now your job becomes trying to solve those problems, trying to remove those obstacles and make their life easier, make them look like a rock star to their boss, to their family, to their significant other, whatever it ends up looking like. But that now becomes your job. And it's also worthwhile to note that while you're building out this target audience persona, understand what platforms they're active on and what types of content they prefer to consume. This is super important because you're trying to build a content marketing strategy, And this kind of gives you the answers. If you understand that your target audience likes to listen to podcasts on their run, and then they share different tips and tricks on Instagram and Facebook, that kind of just built out part of your content strategy for you, right? Now you're going to build a podcast for that target audience, and you're going to slice and dice it on Facebook and Instagram, maybe a couple other places, but really hone in on exactly who this audience is, because they're going to give you a lot of the answers. Also note that you will probably and potentially have a primary target audience. You may have a secondary target audience, and it really depends on what your business structure looks like, what's going to matter most for your business. But nonetheless, you need to figure out who are the decision makers, because sometimes we realize we need to create content for one target audience, but a different target audience is making the decision to convert. So again, understanding what your business goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, do your research, do your homework, understand your target audience, understand exactly who they are, the challenges that they're running into, and how you're going to solve them, and then what content you're going to create to solve them, and on what platforms you're going to distribute that content. Now you've done all of your research, you know your target audience inside and out. And before content creation, actually, we're going to go into content identification. So as I mentioned, we're going to identify one piece of original content for each of your target audiences. And then we're going to create a series of supporting content, or identify a series of supporting content pieces that are built off of that original piece of content for each of your target audiences. Again, this is why it's super important to know exactly who your target audience is, because otherwise we have to redo all this, and you don't want to do that. So let's talk about what original content might look like. So depending on your target audience, this is where we create the original meaty piece of content. So this is not like a social media post. That would be an example of supporting content. Original content is the really meaty stuff. So maybe your original content is you're going to launch a podcast. Maybe that's your original content. And every podcast episode builds into that. Maybe your original content is blog posts. Maybe your original content is a webinar series. Maybe your original content is you're going to write a book. Maybe your original content is a research initiative. Whatever that might be, identify the thing that's going to add the most value for your target audience and hopefully solve some of their problems. I mean, if you can solve all of their life problems, they'll love you even more. But if you can't do that, just focus on the ones that you can solve. And the funny thing about original content is sometimes original content is the thing that you work up to by building supporting pieces of content that culminate in a giant original piece of content. And sometimes you start by building the original piece of content and you slice and dice it and you work backwards from that. So let me give you an example. Let's say your original piece of content is a book. That's the thing that you need to create for your target audience, right? But how are you going to create a book? You can rent a cabin in the woods and you can hold yourself up for a couple months at a time and just write out a masterpiece, like everyone else, right? Or not. Or you might take the approach of, okay, well, I'm going to create the outline for what I think my book looks like. Now I've got my chapters, right? Well, now I'm going to break those chapters up and I'm going to release 1 or 2, depending on what your schedule looks like, blog posts a week for the next year or so. And then at the end of that, I'm going to have all of this written content that I can culminate in these content categories, if you will, or chapters, and reformat it slightly, make a couple tweaks, add a couple new pieces here and there, and now you have your book. So your book could be the original piece of content, and your supporting content could be your blog posts that build into your book. Now, once you have that book, or once you have these blog posts, because blog posts could be its own original piece of content in and of its own. The beautiful thing there is in a blog post, you could always reach out, and it's actually recommended to reach out and pull in somebody else for each of these pieces of content. The beautiful thing about that is that when you build content with other people, now you're expanding your network. You can not only quote them, but then from that quote, you could create a piece of content for social media, put their cute little headshot on there, put the fabulous, brilliant thing that they've said, give them all the credit, give that to them so they can promote it as well. Make sure you give them the link. So now they're driving traffic back to your blog post or whatever it may be. So it's always beneficial to bring in other people when you can, when you're creating original content. But let me give you one of my own examples. So as I mentioned, Brainchild Studios is my company, and we work with brands targeting millennial moms. Another approach you may want to take is not only to create content for your target audience, but create content for your target audience's target audience. So one thing we realized is as we're at Brainchild Studios, we work with brands primarily targeting millennial moms. Well, what we also realized was most of our clients, actual client contacts, are also millennial moms. So when we create content about millennial moms or we create content for millennial moms, we're kind of double dipping. So that may work for you, that may not work for you. But as we worked to create content for our target audience, we also ended up creating content for our target audience's target audience. And what I mean by that is we are conducting annual proprietary research on millennial moms. So it's beneficial to our audience, our target audience, because they need to know more and more about millennial moms, which is their target audience. And we're essentially doing that work for them. So it's a win-win. So what we've done is each year we conduct a survey. We started with qualitative research when we first began, followed it up with quantitative research with a survey. And now on an annual basis, we release an annual survey to an unbiased group of millennial moms, and we ask them a series of questions. And the goal is that year over year, now we're able to report on trends on all these different topics, right? But what we do with that is we get all this data, we analyze all this data, we derive our insights from all of this survey data, and then we categorize it into all these different content categories. So for us right now, at least, it's healthcare, it's education, it's financial decision-making, it's online purchasing behavior, and social media, and that may grow. But what we've been able to do is with each of those categories now, our original piece of content is an ebook. Well, it actually all culminates into an annual report, but that all breaks down. So each category has an ebook. It has an infographic, a quite lengthy designed infographic that goes with it. And then from there, it's sliced and diced into all of these different individual graphics we can use on social media, we can use in email campaigns, and we also have launched webinars. So we were able to pull in other people, pull in industry experts in each of these different fields. And we hosted live webinars where we showed a little bit about our research. And then we just went to the experts, straight to the experts, and talked to them a little bit. So what we were able to do from that single survey is we created one master annual report and a series of infographics. Then we also created 4 different ebooks, a series of infographics, a series of social media and email graphics, and webinars for each of these different pieces. And now that's given us a plethora of content that we can distribute across multiple different platforms. We can now write blog posts to support each of those pieces of content. If you do research, another thing that you can do is take each of the questions that you've asked and build blog posts out of those. So it really lends itself. It's one of those, it's very, very meaty, and research is not going to be the answer for everybody, for all types of audiences, etc. But just to give you an example, it's so meaty and juicy, and you can slice and dice it in so many different ways. And now it positions us as industry leaders, industry thought leaders, and it gives us all this amazing content that we can distribute across multiple platforms throughout the year, and it's scalable and repeatable. So that's just one example of creating original content with all kinds of pieces of supporting content. Now, your goal is with your target audiences, understand each of the problems and the challenges they're running into, and then identify what is the original and supporting pieces of content you can create to add value to each of these target audiences. And then once you have identified all of that, you have it all beautifully laid out. Now map it all out we use spreadsheets to create your editorial calendar. This is super helpful and important because when you're actually in the middle of creating it, it's a little overwhelming. So make sure you create realistic timelines for yourself and see how it maps out against the rest of your calendar, the rest of your different initiatives that you have going on throughout the rest of the year, and then try your best to stick to it. So I will also recommend, there's an amazing book out there that guides you through all this in even greater detail. It's called Sell with Authority by Drew McClellan and Stephen Westner, both dear friends of mine, and the book is amazing and it makes everything super, super clear. But it follows the same thought process here, just in much greater detail. So we're going to recap everything in terms of how you go about creating your content marketing strategy. So as a reminder, before you start anything, make sure you identify your business goals, you identify your business values, vision, and mission, and make sure you take the time to understand what is the right research to dive into for your business. You want to identify your online and offline competitors. You want to take a look at your online and offline marketplace research, and then really figure out if you want to do qualitative and or quantitative customer research, and make sure that you take the approach by understanding what answers you're trying to find, and then write the questions to find those answers. After you figure that out, take a look at all of your different available resources, whether that's Google Analytics, whether that's any social media engagement, whether that's just various engagements with your existing clients and target audience, to really hone in and craft your target audience profiles. Because again, the more specific you can get with that type of person, whether it's the size of the company they work for, the money that they make, the family style they have, where they live, their education levels, political views, social environmental issues, whatever it might be very, very clear. Because once you understand exactly who your ideal target audience is, and it's also worth noting that your current audience may not be your ideal target audience, and that becomes a whole nother thing. But identify exactly who your ideal target audience is, and then laser focus to get more of them and serve them better. So once you identify exactly who that person is, then you're identifying what content you can create to add the most value to their lives. So the original piece of content, and then you're going to slice and dice it into the supporting content, or vice versa. You build supporting content into a master original piece of content. And then you've got that all laid out in your editorial calendar. So what I would say is, when you're to the point where you've got your editorial calendar in place, take a step back and see what existing resources you have available to execute against this. Chances are you're probably going to need copywriting assistance, probably graphic design. You may need some video or podcast or editing capabilities somewhere along the lines. What do you currently have in place? And then identify what you need to outsource or strategic partners you can work with, etc., to get the job done. And really just start. That's oftentimes the hardest part. Is great, now you've got a plan and now you have to do something about it. But that's the nice thing of having it written down, is now it's not in your head and you don't have to constantly think about, oh yeah, what was I doing over here and when is that going out and who is responsible for what? I also recommend, if you don't already have this in place, to put together or put into place a project management software. At Brainchild, we use Asana, but there's plenty of them out there. So use whatever works best for you guys, and just start executing. And be super strategic and super intentional with the way you go about things. And then I would also recommend, you've created this content strategy. Chances are it's probably a year-long-ish strategy. Maybe it's 12 to 18 months, who knows? revisit it. Make sure you create a game plan for yourself that, okay, 9 months in, we're going to analyze, okay, how are things going? What has worked? What hasn't worked? How do we need to tweak this? And what are we going to do differently moving forward? Because the reality is, and I realize I say that a lot, but we're just going to keep it real. The reality is that owning a small business is tough and it changes all the time. And so you need to do what you need to do to stay on top of everything. And keeping your finger on the pulse of the ever-changing market is part of that. And so that should be reflected in your content strategy. So I hope that this has been helpful. There's a lot that can go into this, and there's a lot to digest. When we do content strategies, it takes us a couple of months to pull them together. But really, you will know your business better than anybody else. But it's always nice to have that outside perspective, because sometimes we miss the things that are right in front of us. So if you have any other questions, we have additional resources at brainchildstudios.com. But hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully you feel empowered to get your content strategy up and running and to really elevate your business to the next level. Best of luck to all of you.